I'm telling you, Alex, something's off. She's acting different. My fingers drummed nervously on the kitchen counter, the phone held close to my ear. I could hear my friend on the other end sigh, probably leaning back in his chair. Have you talked to her about it? Alex asked, the sound of papers shuffling in the background. He always had something on his desk, some report or spreadsheet, even at this hour. I tried, I replied, glancing toward the empty living room where a framed picture of Emily and me on our wedding day stared back at me. It was supposed to be our perfect life. 5 years of marriage, and I never thought I'd be the kind of man to have doubts. But she's distant. The last few months have been strange. Look, man, I know how this goes, Alex said, his tone a bit softer now. She's probably just stressed. That writing workshop she's at, it's a big deal, right? That's what I thought at first. But she barely calls, and when she does, she's different. Like she's somewhere else mentally. I don't know how to explain it. Alex was silent for a moment before speaking again. Have you thought about going up there? Surprising her? See what's really going on? I had. Hell, it had crossed my mind more than once to hop in the car and drive the 2 hours to the retreat center in the hills. But that would make me look paranoid, controlling, everything I wasn't. Emily had always valued her independence, and I'd never been the kind of husband to question it. Yeah, I've thought about it, I muttered. But I can't just show up there. Well, if you're really worried, there's another option, Alex said after a pause. I could hear the unease in his voice before he continued. You could hire someone. What do you mean, hire someone? I asked, already sensing where this conversation was headed. A private investigator. Just for peace of mind. Have them check things out, see if anything's out of the ordinary. The suggestion hit me like a punch to the gut. A pie? To spy on my wife? It sounded absurd. But the gnawing feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. Emily had left for her writing workshop 2 weeks ago, and since then, nothing felt right. The texts had become fewer, the calls more brief. And when we did speak, there was a hesitation in her voice, a kind of detachment I couldn't shake. Look, I'm not saying she's doing anything wrong, Alex added quickly. But if you need to settle your mind, it's an option. I ran my hand through my hair, letting out a deep breath. Could I really do that? Was it right? The logical part of my brain screamed no, that I was being irrational, that Emily had done nothing to deserve such suspicion. But the other part, the part fueled by weeks of sleepless nights and gut-wrenching doubts, said otherwise. Do you know anyone? I finally asked, my voice quieter now, almost ashamed. Yeah, Alex replied. I've got a guy. He's discreet. I can send you his info. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision sink in. Send it over. The next day, I sat in a small cafe, nursing a cup of coffee as I waited. The pie was supposed to meet me here at noon. I didn't know what to expect. Alex had assured me this guy was professional, but the whole situation felt surreal. What was I even doing? I had barely finished the thought when the door opened, and a man walked in. He was in his late 40s, dressed in a plain black jacket and jeans. Nothing about him screamed detective, but he had that air of someone who'd seen too much, like a character out of an old noir film. His eyes met mine, and he gave a slight nod before heading toward my table. You must be Josh, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. His voice was low, calm, and he had a no-nonsense attitude about him. Yeah, I replied, feeling a little on edge. You're Steve? That's me. He took out a small notebook and pen, placing them on the table. Alex told me what you need. So, let's get to it. I cleared my throat, suddenly feeling uncomfortable. I'm not really sure how this works. It's simple, Steve said, flipping open his notebook. You tell me what you're worried about. I take a few days, check out the situation, and get back to you with what I find. If nothing's going on, then you can sleep easy. If something is, well, we'll cross that bridge if we get there. I stared at him for a moment, wondering how he could talk about this so casually. But I suppose this was just another day at the office for him. Okay, I began, swallowing hard. My wife, Emily. She's at this summer writing workshop, about 2 hours from here. She's been there for a couple of weeks. At first, everything was fine, but lately, I don't know, she's been distant. She barely calls, and when she does, it's like she's distracted. Have you noticed any other changes in her behavior before she left? Steve asked, his pen poised over the page. I thought back, trying to pinpoint when things started feeling off. Yeah, actually. A few months ago, she started getting really into this workshop. I mean, she's always loved writing, but she became almost obsessed with it. She'd stay up late, working on her stories, and she stopped talking to me about her day like she used to. I thought it was just because she was focused, but now, I don't know. Steve nodded, scribbling a few notes. And have you considered that maybe she's just stressed or overwhelmed by the workshop? I nodded. Yeah, I have. But something doesn't sit right with me. He paused for a moment, then looked up from his notebook. All right, I'll take the job. I'll head up there tomorrow, spend a couple of days around the workshop, and see what's what. You'll hear from me soon. I gave him a brief nod, my stomach churning as I watched him stand up, pocket his notebook, and head for the door. The reality of what I had just set in motion hit me hard. I was spying on my wife. A week later, I was sitting at my desk, staring blankly at the same email for the third time. The subject was mundane, something about project deadlines, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept wandering back to the last conversation I'd had with Steve. You'll hear from me soon. But soon had passed. The days had crawled by with agonizing slowness, and each one without a call or text from Emily added weight to my suspicions. I had tried to distract myself with work, friends, anything, but nothing could pull me from the looming cloud hanging over my life. My phone buzzed, snapping me back to reality. I glanced down and saw a text from an unknown number. Meet me at Sullivan Park. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Steve. A pit formed in my stomach. This was it. Whatever Steve had found, or hadn't, would all come out tomorrow. I couldn't sleep that night. Every worst-case scenario played through my head, over and over again. What if he'd found something? What if Emily really was cheating on me? And what the hell was I supposed to do if that turned out to be true? By the time 10 a.m. rolled around, I was already at the park, pacing near the fountain. It was a cloudy morning, the air thick with humidity. Steve arrived exactly on time, as if he'd timed it to the second. He walked over, his expression giving nothing away. He didn't even bother with small talk. Josh, he nodded. Let's talk. We walked over to a bench, and I could feel my pulse quickening. Steve sat down, pulled out his familiar notebook, and flipped it open. He paused, as if considering his words carefully. I spent 3 days around the workshop, he began. Watched the comings and goings of everyone. And I'm just going to give it to you straight. I swallowed hard, bracing myself for whatever he was about to say. I could feel the tension building, the anticipation of what was about to come crashing down. She's having an affair, Steve said bluntly. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt my body go cold, my hands trembling slightly as I sat there, staring at him, unable to fully process it. A million thoughts rushed through my head all at once, but I couldn't form a coherent sentence. With who? I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. A guy named Luke, Steve replied, flipping through his notes. He's a writer too, apparently one of the workshop instructors. I've got pictures, timestamps, everything you need. He pulled out a small manila envelope from his jacket and handed it to me. I stared at it for a moment, afraid to open it. Afraid of what I'd see inside. But my curiosity, or perhaps the need for closure, got the better of me. I slowly opened the envelope and pulled out the photos. The first one was of Emily, standing outside a small cabin, laughing. She looked different. More alive than I'd seen her in months. The next picture was of her and a man, tall, with dark hair, walking side by side. They were close, their hands brushing against each other's. My heart sank further as I flipped through more photos, the two of them having dinner together at a local cafe, sitting across from each other but leaning in close, them walking along a wooded path, her arm looped through his, and finally, the one that sealed it all, a shot of them kissing, tucked away near the edge of the woods, hidden from the world. It felt like the ground had fallen out from under me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. Everything I'd feared, everything I didn't want to believe was staring at me in those glossy photographs. Emily, my wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was having an affair. I'm sorry, man, Steve said, his voice softer now. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to hold it together. I couldn't break down here, not in front of Steve, not in public. Thanks, I muttered, still staring at the photos, unable to look away. What else did you find? Steve scratched his chin. Not much else to say. They've been seeing each other pretty regularly during the workshop. She stayed over at his place a few times. I didn't dig into their history too much, it's clear enough from what I saw. I nodded, trying to process everything. Emily wasn't just cheating, she had created a whole separate life. A life she clearly enjoyed, a life where I didn't exist. So, what now? I asked, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to Steve or myself. That's up to you, Steve said. You can confront her, talk it out, whatever you think is best. Or, If you want to walk away from this quietly, I can help with that too. Walk away? The words sounded foreign to me, but in the back of my mind, the idea was starting to take shape. Wasn't that exactly what I'd been considering before all this started? The idea of disappearing, of slipping out of this mess without confrontation, without the drama and tears? You mean just leave? Steve nodded. It's not uncommon. Some people don't want the confrontation. If you want, I can help you get everything in order, financially, legally, and you can be gone by the time she gets back. No mess, no explanations. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, weighing the options in my mind. The thought of confronting Emily, of having that conversation, made me sick to my stomach. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her apologies, her lies. And deep down, I knew the person she had become in those photos wasn't someone I could save. Not anymore. I need to think about it, I said quietly, my hands shaking as I stuffed the photos back into the envelope. Take your time, Steve said, standing up. But whatever you decide, don't wait too long. She'll be back from the workshop soon. I nodded, unable to find the words. Steve gave me a final nod before walking away, leaving me alone on the bench with nothing but the sound of the fountain and the weight of my new reality pressing down on me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the manila envelope still in front of me. My laptop was open to my banking app, and I found myself staring at the numbers. The joint accounts. The mortgage. The credit cards. Steve's offer rang in my head. Disappearing wasn't as crazy as it sounded. I could start over somewhere. Emily didn't need to know where I went or why. All the pain, all the betrayal, I could leave it behind. Maybe it was time to become a ghost, a man without a past. The idea lingered, tempting me more with each passing hour. The next morning, I woke up feeling hollow, like I was living someone else's life. The images of Emily and that man, Luke, replayed in my mind, tormenting me every time I closed my eyes. I could barely eat, could barely think of anything but the decision I now faced. Confront her, or disappear. It was absurd that those were my options. Only weeks ago, I had been living a life of routine, a life I thought was solid and steady. But now, everything had been turned upside down. And I didn't want to confront her. There was no point in talking it out or trying to make sense of it. Emily had already made her choice. She had picked another life, a life with someone else. But disappearing? That felt so extreme. Yet the more I thought about it, the more it felt like the cleanest way out. No tears, no angry words, no awkward explanations. I could leave all this behind, start fresh somewhere else, where no one knew me or the mess I was walking away from. The envelope still sat on the kitchen table, unopened since I'd shoved the photos back into it the day before. I hadn't touched it since then, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Emily wouldn't be home for another 2 days. That gave me enough time to make a plan, if that was really what I wanted. I found myself scrolling through an old contact in my phone. Her name was Sophia, an old friend from college. She had moved to a small town in Oregon a few years back, somewhere isolated and quiet. She'd sent me a message about 6 months ago, catching up, telling me about how peaceful it was where she lived, how it was the perfect place for someone to find themselves. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, it seemed almost prophetic. My thumb hovered over her name, hesitating. What would I even say? Hey, Sophia, remember me? I'm thinking of leaving my entire life behind, can you help me out? But I wasn't thinking straight. I couldn't make a decision based on impulse. Not yet. I needed to be sure. That afternoon, I called Steve. Josh, he answered, his voice as steady as always. You've made a decision? Not yet, I said, my hand gripping the phone tighter. But if I do? If I decide to go through with it, how would it work? There was a pause on the other end, as if Steve was calculating how much to say. It depends. We can start with your finances, get you set up with an account that's untouchable by anyone else. We can also arrange for your assets to be liquidated if that's what you want. Once that's in place, I can help you find a relocation service, someone to help you disappear. You'll have a new identity, new location. It's not easy, but it's possible. The reality of it began to sink in. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment fantasy, it was an actual process. Something people did when they needed to escape, to start over. The kind of thing I used to think only happened in crime dramas or spy movies. And Emily? I asked, my voice tightening at the mention of her name. Would she? What happens with her? She'll be notified after you're gone, if that's what you want, Steve explained. There won't be any trail leading back to you. She'll know you're gone, but not where you've gone or why, unless you choose to leave a message. The idea of leaving without saying a word sent a chill down my spine. What would Emily think when she came back to an empty house? Would she even care? Or would she simply move on with Luke, forgetting me as easily as she had cheated on me? And how long do I have? I asked, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I was stalling. Maybe I still wasn't ready to admit that this was my only option. If you want to disappear before she returns, you'll need to make the move by tomorrow at the latest, Steve replied. It'll give us enough time to set everything up. I'll take care of the legal work, divorce, splitting assets, all of it. You just need to pack what's necessary and leave the rest behind. Tomorrow. I had until tomorrow to decide whether I was going to walk away from everything I had built with Emily. Everything I had known for the last 5 years. But maybe I had already made my decision. Deep down, I knew I didn't want to stay. There was nothing left here for me, not anymore. That night, I packed a small suitcase. I didn't take much, just the essentials. Clothes, my laptop, a few personal items I couldn't bear to leave behind. The house was quiet as I moved from room to room, the silence deafening. This had been our home, a place filled with laughter and shared memories, but now it felt like a shell. A place I no longer belonged. As I packed, I kept looking at the framed photo of Emily and me from our honeymoon in Italy, standing on a cliff overlooking the sea, both of us smiling, carefree. I took it down and stared at it for a long time, wondering where things had gone wrong. When had that woman, the one who had laughed and kissed me under the Tuscan sun, become the stranger in Steve's photos? I placed the frame face down on the counter. I couldn't look at it anymore. I checked the time, nearly midnight. I still hadn't called Sophia. I wasn't sure if I would, or if I'd just disappear into some other place, far from everyone I knew. It felt like there were so many doors I could walk through, but all of them led to the same thing: freedom from this life. The next morning, I texted Steve. I'm in. Let's do it. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Steve moved fast, just like he'd promised. He had me meet with a man named Walter, a lawyer who specialized in the kind of paperwork needed for someone to vanish. Walter had a cold, professional demeanor, explaining everything in detail as if he'd done this 1,000 times. You'll have access to your new accounts once you've left, Walter said, sliding a stack of papers across the desk. We've already set things in motion with your joint assets. Your wife will receive notice of the divorce in the coming days. Do you have any message you'd like to leave? I stared at the blank line in front of me, the space where I was supposed to write some final words to Emily. Something that explained my decision, something that told her I was gone for good. But nothing came. What could I possibly say that would make this better? What could I write that wouldn't feel like an empty gesture? So I left it blank. She didn't deserve an explanation. Walter glanced at the unsigned note, then at me. He didn't say a word, just gave me a curt nod and slid the papers into a folder. It's done, he said. You're free to leave. I stepped out of his office into the warm evening air, my suitcase in hand. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the streets. I took a deep breath, the weight of everything settling on my shoulders, but for the first time in weeks, there was a strange sense of relief. Emily would return in a couple of days to find the life she had destroyed had disappeared, just like I had. That night, I got into my car and drove. The road stretched out in front of me, an endless ribbon of possibility. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I didn't need to. All I knew was that it was far from here, far from the wreckage of what my life had been. I was a ghost now, a man without a past. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The hum of the road beneath my tires became a dull, comforting drone. Miles blurred into hours as I headed north, toward an uncertain future. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. Not Alex, not my parents, no one. I wasn't even sure myself. The only thing I knew was that I needed distance. Distance from Emily, from the life we had built, and from the person I had been. I had spent so long defining myself by my marriage, by our routines, that I wasn't sure who I was without it. As I crossed state lines into Oregon, a strange sense of detachment washed over me. It felt like I was watching someone else's life unfold, like I was just a passenger in my own body. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the road ahead. The trees thickened as the highway wound through the dense forests, and the towns grew smaller, more remote. I didn't have a plan beyond driving. The idea of disappearing had seemed clean and liberating when Steve laid it out, but the reality was messier. I had no destination in mind, no idea what I was going to do once I got wherever I ended up. But that uncertainty was part of the appeal. The open road represented freedom in its purest form. Eventually, after nearly 6 hours of driving, I pulled off the highway and into a small town nestled in the foothills of the mountains. It was the kind of place people came to escape, to hide from the world. The kind of place where a man could disappear without anyone asking too many questions. I parked outside a nondescript motel, the kind that didn't ask for much more than a name and a credit card. The neon sign flickered in the dusk, casting an eerie red glow over the parking lot. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the dashboard, my hands gripping the steering wheel. This was it. I had really done it. There was no going back now. The room was as plain and lifeless as I expected: beige walls, a stained carpet, and a bed that looked like it had seen better days. I dropped my suitcase by the door and sat on the edge of the bed, the creaking of the springs breaking the silence. For the first time since leaving, I took out my phone and scrolled through my messages. Nothing from Emily. Not even a missed call. She was supposed to be back from the workshop by now, back to the house we had once shared. I wondered what she would think when she saw the empty closets, the divorce papers. Would she even care? Or had she already moved on with Luke, too absorbed in her new life to notice my absence? I tossed the phone onto the bed and leaned back, staring at the cracked ceiling. A heavy silence settled in the room, pressing down on me. For all the talk of freedom and starting over, I wasn't sure what came next. Disappearing was one thing. Living with that decision was another. My phone buzzed, the sudden vibration jolting me out of my thoughts. I grabbed it, expecting some automated message or junk mail, but the screen flashed with a familiar name. Alex. I hesitated. I hadn't told him anything about what was going on, and part of me wanted to keep it that way. But another part of me, the part that was still human, still craving connection, needed to hear a familiar voice. I answered the call. Josh. Alex's voice came through, a mix of concern and confusion. Where the hell are you, man? I've been trying to reach you for days. I took a deep breath, unsure how to begin. I'm out of town. Yeah, I figured that much. But Emily's been looking for you. She says you just disappeared. Your stuff's gone, your car's gone. What the hell happened? My stomach clenched at the mention of Emily. So, she had noticed. But I wasn't sure if it was concern or just curiosity that drove her to look for me. Alex, I don't know how to explain this. Things with Emily. They weren't what I thought they were. I found out she was cheating on me. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear Alex processing the information. Cheating? Are you sure? Yeah. I'm sure. I could feel my throat tighten, the weight of it all settling in again. I hired a pie, Alex. He got the proof. Pictures. Everything. Jesus, Josh. His voice trailed off, as if he didn't know what to say. I had no idea. I'm sorry, man. I don't even know what to say. I didn't either. But I couldn't stay. I couldn't face her after that. So I left. Left? Alex repeated, the confusion clear in his voice. What do you mean, left? Like you just took off? Yeah, I said, running a hand through my hair. I'm gone, Alex. I'm not going back. There was another long pause, the silence on the line stretching between us. I could hear Alex sigh on the other end, the sound of disbelief heavy in his voice. Look, I get that you're hurt. I can't even imagine what you're feeling right now, but disappearing like this? Is that really what you want? I don't know what I want anymore, I admitted, the exhaustion creeping into my voice. All I know is that I can't go back to the life I had. It's over. And Emily? What happens when she finds out you're not coming back? She'll get the divorce papers. That's it. I'm not leaving her a message, not explaining anything. She knows what she did. I could feel the frustration building inside me. Why was Alex asking me all these questions? Why did it matter what happened to Emily? She had made her choice when she kissed Luke, when she lied to my face for weeks. You can't just vanish, Josh, Alex said, his tone softer now, more understanding. I know it feels like the only option, but this isn't going to fix anything. You're still going to have to live with this, no matter where you are. I closed my eyes, his words cutting through the fog of anger and confusion in my mind. He was right. Disappearing wasn't going to erase the pain. It wasn't going to undo what Emily had done. But it was the only way I could think of to move on. To start over. I know, I said quietly. But I can't stay. Alex was silent for a moment, and when he finally spoke again, there was a sadness in his voice. Just don't do anything you'll regret, all right? If you need anything, you call me. Thanks, man, I replied, my voice thick with emotion. I'll be okay. After hanging up, I sat in the silence of the motel room, Alex's words ringing in my ears. He was right, I couldn't run from the pain. But staying wasn't an option either. I wasn't disappearing to fix things. I was disappearing to survive. That night, I lay awake in the stiff motel bed, staring at the ceiling. For hours, my mind raced through everything that had led me here, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the decision to vanish. I wasn't sure if I had made the right choice, but for the first time, it felt like my choice. Not one dictated by Emily, or by the life we had built together. It was mine. 2 days later, I found myself in a small coastal town, the ocean stretching out in front of me, endless and wide. The salty air felt different, clean, untainted by the weight of my past. I stood on the shore, watching the waves crash against the rocks, and for a moment, I felt something close to peace. The world here was quiet, slow moving. It was the kind of place where a man could lose himself, blend into the background, and let time wash away the memories. As I walked along the beach, the wind whipping at my hair, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The pain wouldn't vanish with my new identity, and the ghosts of my old life would follow me, at least for a while. But standing there, with the vast ocean stretching endlessly before me, I felt the tiniest spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could start again.